think that that was probably another tick bite and just put me over the edge because then the symptoms really got a lot more profound. The heart episodes continued to happen to the point where I was passing out. The joint pain came back, the brain fog, fatigue, the weight issues, like all of these things. And the thing about Lyme disease, and many diseases are this way, but Lyme is especially bad for having such broad symptoms that you go in and the doctor says you have fibromyalgia, or maybe they misdiagnose you with lupus or some other thing because those symptoms are so broad. Even depression is a big one. People have depression and it turns out they have Lyme. It's just that, they didn't have a bullseye, or maybe they don't have joint pain yet. And so they're just given an antidepressant and told, go about your way.
Welcome back to another episode of Cultivating Change, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Alex Corey, and I'm excited to share today's guest with you, introducing Jamie Bennet of the Functional Wellness Collective. Jamie has an incredibly powerful and transformative personal story overcoming some fairly debilitating or seemingly debilitating conditions such as Lyme disease, which so many people suffer from, mold poisoning, and all of the ramifications of those different autoimmune conditions as well, such as Hashimotos, that seemingly cripple our nervous system and give us lethargy and brain fog and heart conditions in her case, and feels like we're not in control of our own body, and in some cases feels hopeless. And Jamie has found a number of different modalities, accurate testing sites, nutritional protocols, 4-pillar protocols that can help people get their life back and their health back from those seemingly chronic, lifelong, debilitating conditions. And I'm looking forward to getting into the episode, and I hope you learn a ton from this. Introducing Jamie Bennet. I am really excited to talk about Lyme disease and Hashimoto's and all sorts of very specific autoimmune and everything that I believe you had to deal with. Could you briefly introduce yourself and how you found out and worked through something as seemingly debilitating as a diagnosis of Lyme disease, or any metabolic conditions like Hashimoto's? How did you come to find that in your own life, and how did you move through it?
Well, it was actually a really long journey. Looking back, I think about, you get all these warning signs when you're sick. Have you ever done that? Like little things pop up and you ignore them. You don't think twice about them. It's, oh, I'm stressed, or oh, it's aging, until all of a sudden something happens. You're like, oh, why didn't I pay attention to those warning signs? So I had warning signs even in high school, and different things that happened. And then, I was diagnosed back then, even with lupus, my inflammation was through the roof. They gave me steroids. They're like, oh, let's wait. You're young. We don't want to diagnose you with lupus just quite yet. And so they gave me steroids and antibiotics and just kind of just dumped a whole bunch of stuff in me, and I got better for a while. But then my heart started having problems. And then I was told, oh, you're young. It's probably anxiety. Stop drinking coffee. Stop eating chocolate. And meanwhile, they never actually checked my heart. No EKG, nothing. Just were like, this is all stress related. So I went about my way, continued to have these mysterious symptoms, got married, had children, went to college, dropped out of college, ended up through all of those, young people mistakes / life choices. I finally landed in public safety. And so I did some time as an 911 operator, and then I felt like I was called to be in law enforcement. I was like, all right, I'm on one side of the phone. I want to be on the other side of the phone. I want to see what happens, So when I got into law enforcement and I was in training, I actually got a bite on my knee, and we just thought it was a bug bite. And that as well swelled up to the point where I got cellulitis. I was hospitalized with that. And then that just exacerbated all of the symptoms that I had been having since high school. And so I'll tell you that there was a question about whether that was my tick bite, but we're actually thinking it was back in high school. And, the body is just so amazing that it can take on some things, right? It can sit there and it fights, and, we're exposed to toxins all the time. Even our cells make toxins that as long as that cup's not running over, it deals, right? It's a matter of what can your immune system keep at bay. And I think that was probably another tick bite and just put me over the edge. because then the symptoms really got a lot more profound. The heart episodes continued to happen to the point where I was passing out. You know, the joint pain came back, the brain fog, fatigue, the weight issues, like all of these things. And the thing about Lyme disease, and many diseases are this way, but Lyme is especially bad for having such broad symptoms that you go in and the doctor says you have fibromyalgia, or maybe they misdiagnose you with lupus or some other thing because those symptoms are so broad. Even depression's a big one. People have depression and it turns out they have Lyme. It's just that, you know, they didn't have a bullseye, or maybe they don't have joint pain yet. And so they're just given an antidepressant and told, you know, go about your way. Well, you know, so for me, again, I went about my way, right? Continue with these symptoms that are partially all in my head. I started.
Yeah. Can I ask a brief question? Does Lyme have a blood test diagnosis, or are they going off a pure manifestation of symptomology?
It does have blood tests.
Okay.
Now, they're, depending who you talk to, 80 to 90% inaccurate, and will give you false negatives. They've even, they've even come out with new tests, right? But standard doctors tend to go to those standard tests, the ones that you can go to Quest and LabCorp and get, and those are the ones that are the most unreliable. And you know, and they did it for me during my journey. And of course, you get one negative, and they're like, "Oh, never going to turn that stone over again. Never going to check again." There are some new ones out. Like when I was diagnosed, there was one called My Lyme ID. Now, IGeneX is my favorite for diagnosing. It's the most, because one of the things that people need to understand is, like, according to the CDC, you have to have so many bands of antibodies present, right? But if you're in the medical field or in the health field at all, you know, any antibody means that your body has been exposed to it and detected it. Yeah. So I don't care if you have one strand or 7 strands coming back with antibodies, you have encountered that at some point, right? And, you know, I didn't know it until down the road, and it's further in my story, but my son, who I gave Lyme in utero, he was told he was negative too. And, you know, as I get smarter through my journey, and this is before I got in health and wellness, I started to get where I'm like, okay, I want copies of my stuff. And he had bands that were positive. He was shy by 1 band in order to meet the criteria for the CDC. So I was told he was negative. And, you know, and it's really heartbreaking, just because we know there's so many people that have been misdiagnosed and have actually passed away, or, you know, you end up with permanent symptoms that don't resolve despite the fact that you get your Lyme under control. But yes, so you mentioned that you asked about the test, and there is a test. Now there's Lyme literate medical doctors is what they call them, LLMD. They will go on symptoms and completely treat somebody based on those, even if the test is negative, because of how many false negatives there are. Yeah. So if they get somebody in their clinic who is presenting with this broad array of symptoms that could be Lyme, and they've already been to other doctors and, you know, been ruled out for having, you know, RA,
rheumatoid arthritis.
Yes, I'm sorry, rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and Parkinson's and all these things that can also cause these symptoms. They're not going to tell you that you just have fibromyalgia, right? They're going to actually go ahead and say, well, let's try some antibiotics. Let's see how your body responds. And that, sadly, more often than not, is what people end up having to do. Because once you start treating it, then the body will start to react. So Lyme turns off the immune system, which is where these false negatives come in, is it tricks the immune system. And because of that, when you start treating it, though, and you start bringing in things that boost the immune system, not just the antibiotics that are treating the Lyme, you know, the spirochete, killing the spirochete, but also bringing in modalities that boost the immune system, the body's like, wait a minute, I just realized that's not supposed to be there. And so it's really amazing to see, like when my son was being treated, he went from 1 band shy to all of a sudden all the bands lit up. Wow. Because his body suddenly was able to recognize it, because his immune system was finally starting to come do what it's supposed to do.
I didn't know that's how that worked. That is terrifying.
Yeah. I did not turn positive, a strong positive, until after I started getting treated. Yeah.
So is Lyme only characterized as the presence of, you said 7 different strains of, is this bacteria or what type, what cause? So obviously tick bites or what most people, deer tick. I'm from New Hampshire, so that was very, Lyme, Connecticut's not that far away from New Hampshire. Is it 7 specific types of bacteria, or what is the causal agent in Lyme disease?
Those are going to be the strains that they're looking for antibodies.
Right.
The different reactions the body gets is what the CDC is looking for.
Right.
But there are different types of Lyme. Absolutely. They have one now called, it's either relapsing fever or reoccurring fever Lyme. And if you think about any superbug, even the big COVID we have right now, everything tends to morph, right, to try to keep itself alive, and Lyme has been no different. So we do have a couple of different types of Lyme, and then and its actual name is Borrelia, but and then on top of that, you have to think about those comorbid conditions, right? Birds of a feather flock together, and I honestly have not met a client, had somebody come to me or anybody that I know through the Lyme community that has only had Lyme and not had Babesia, Bartonella, or any of the other comorbid conditions that you can have.
Okay, so it is one specific strain, and then because of the immune system suppressing effects, there are other things that come in generally with it.
Yes, you're talking about the antibodies again, the bands.
Yeah.
I don't know the science behind the bands, to be honest with you. It's just it's the different layers of antibodies, kind of like when you get vaccinated. I'm sure you probably don't, when you get vaccinated for the flu, right? If they test it, which they did with my daughter because she had an immune deficiency, they want to see which one she took, and they are looking, and so they're looking to see how many bands of your antibodies actually responded, and how many different bands of antibodies did you develop to that flu vaccine.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense? And so it's like that. But again, and so it's just a CDC has stricter requirements on what they're going to be willing to call, a positive than what you or I know is a positive, or what a Lyme literate medical doctor is going to call a positive.
Yeah, that sounds so frustrating just for people who are experiencing these like debilitating symptoms. And you would think the testing would be the like simplest thing in any form of treatment. Where you're like, let's figure out if you have this. And that's the wishy-washy part. That must be extremely frustrating.
It is. And then even if you're lucky enough to come back with a positive, then we have to think about the insurance companies who aren't willing to pay for it, which is a whole nother level of frustration, undue stress on whether financially or even emotionally on the families that have to deal with that, because it's mostly out of pocket. I mean, by the time, in the end, we found out that I had given my children, at least 2 of my children, Lyme in utero, right? And then, now all 3 of my children have Lyme. My husband has Lyme. We're in a very prevalent area for it. But just to treat myself and my 2 children, even after insurance, when all was said and done, we spent over $250,000, $250,000 out of pocket just to stay alive. And it's sad because health is a fundamental right? And there's so many people out there that, because they don't have that kind of money lying around or help from their family or their community, they just don't get to. And Lyme, can attack every single piece of the body, including, the heart, the brain, things that we have to have. It's not like we can replace those.
Yeah, you said you're having some serious heart issues. I didn't know that piece of it. What's usually the first thing that pops up for most people? Like if they don't notice a bullseye the traditional way, they don't see a tick, what's usually the most common thing that someone would be like, that's a new symptom? Like what usually pops up? Or is it so varied that it differs between everyone?
It does vary, but if I had to choose the most common, I'd say like flu-like symptoms. So your joints feel hurt and are achy, you're really tired, and maybe you're getting a headache.
Okay. And that is persistent?
Oh yeah.
That sounds awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. I interrupted your story. Do you remember where you left
No.
off?
I tend to go off on tangents. So, but I'm trying to think where I was. Okay. So, my symptoms continued to get worse,
Yeah.
and it was everything. So when I was pregnant with my third child, I couldn't even climb the stairwell. And my family was having to, push me up the stairs. I called the doctor, and of course, no offense, it was a man doctor who said, "Well, you're just getting fat, you're pregnant. This is what pregnancy feels like." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, this is my third child. I know this is not normal. I'm not just getting fat. Yes, I'm getting fat, but it's different." And I couldn't. There was a point where here I am driving a cruiser. I'd have to pull it over and fall asleep because I could not physically stay awake. And until somebody gets that level of fatigue, there's no way you can explain it to somebody. You'll fall asleep at a stoplight. It's just, there's nothing left in your battery to give. You can't push through it. And I continued to get worse. And when my son was born, he was not making us milestones. At first, he would make them right at the ragged edge. So if it was, you're going to do this by 6 months, he'd hit it like the day before his 6th month. And then it got to where if it was, at 9 months, it was 9 months in a week. And then if he was supposed to hit something by 12 months at the latest, it was 12 and a half to 13 months, and he just kept slowly getting further behind. And, I was so consumed by that. And again, pediatrician said, boys are slower than girls. You had 2 girls before this, boys are lazy. Just wasn't jiving for me. And, so I was burning the candle at both ends, trying to figure out what's wrong with him. Meanwhile, I was getting sicker and sicker. I couldn't work anymore.
How old are you at this point?
30.
Okay.
And so I couldn't work. My daughter was having behavioral issues like you'd not believe. And she'd been sick since birth. Again, we didn't know why. And I always tell people, and I'd be like, she's just bad. And I hate to say that, but if you hear her today, she's a wonderful girl. She'll be like, "Oh no, Mom, that's the nicest way you could have put it. I was bad." But she was in pain and she was struggling. She was behind in school. She was behind in communication. She's behind in reading. And she became violent and disobedient. And so we were dealing with her as well. And, I started going to doctors for everything. I had shortness of breath. I was having my heart episodes. I couldn't get up the stairs even after my son was born. I couldn't get up the stairs by myself. I couldn't get out of a chair without assistance. Anything you can think of. But of course, as a mama bear, I was so focused on him. And we went to doctors. I mean, I had surgeries. They did muscle biopsies. I was flown to Mayo. They did heart ablations, just all of these things, and still couldn't find the smoking gun. They at one point I had MS, one point I had Parkinson's. They finally decided, okay, we think you have ALS, which is a diagnosis you get from exclusion, right? You have to rule out everything else anyway. And so I just succumbed that I'm probably going to get a lot worse. This is going to get really bad. I mean, if Mayo can't figure out what's wrong with me. Yeah. And all the while, my son has been diagnosed with severe autism. They said he was 2 points from being diagnosed as mentally retarded, that he would end up in a home. My daughter was diagnosed with autism. I was told she had a personality disorder. She had learning disabilities. I was even told when she was 9 that I should sleep with one eye open because of how bad she was. And, it just, we continued. My husband's working a bazillion hours because we're at home. We're traveling different states, trying to see different doctors. And what's crazy is after all of this, and I did have a Lyme test and it was negative, so they never looked under that rock again. After all that happened, and I'm trying to work on, I've got, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, all these coming for my son, taking my daughter to counseling, that again, I wasn't so worried about me. I succumbed to my issue. My husband got Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Oh. Which is a very acute, I mean, it can kill you, but it's acute. And so, he couldn't move, goes to the ER. They were able to diagnose him on a blood test. And the good thing, if there is a good thing about Rocky Mountain, is you take the antibiotics and you'll feel better. It's not as chronic like Lyme. But at this point, I had made a career in playing Dr. Google, trying to figure out what was wrong with me and my family. And so I was like, we need to see a Lyme literate medical doctor, because what I'm reading is that if a tick has something, it's probably got something else. So let's go make sure that you didn't get one of these other tick-borne diseases too. And it took us a while to get in. And when we got there, the doctor's sitting there and she's going, well, do you have blah, blah, blah? And she's asking about a symptom. And he'd say no. And he'd look over at me and go, you have that. And then she'd ask him another question and he'd say, I don't have that, but you have that. And after he did this back and forth for a couple of times, the doctor goes, I know this is not her appointment, but can I ask your wife a question? And she asked me if I'd take one of her Lyme tests, which was a little bit, I told you it was a different test, and it was a little bit more accurate. And that's when I finally came back. It was completely by, taking my husband to an appointment, and this doctor taking a second to go listen to our conversation and asking to speak with me, that we found it. And when I came back positive, I asked that, she checked my kids, and of course they were positive as well.
Was there relief in that because you had something to go off of? What was the experience or your feeling during that?
Honestly, there was, and you shouldn't say that. Nobody should want to be sick, and I certainly didn't want to be sick. But when you're sick, without a shadow of a doubt, you're not making this up, and it's almost an invisible illness. You'd want a diagnosis, because then if you can put a name on it, you know who to be mad at. If I'm pissed, who am I pissed at? And so there was some relief there, because obviously ALS is a horrible, horrible thing to have. And, at that point, I was having seizures, you name it. And so I knew there was something wrong. And I had doctors who were saying things like, you're just in depression, you have fibromyalgia, you just don't want to be a stay-at-home mom. That was written on my chart at one point.
Wow.
Yeah. And there was a point where they wanted to look at my heart and go in and put me to sleep. And they actually, here I'm asleep, and they took my mom out in the waiting room and said, we think this is all psychosomatic. We're just doing this to appease her. So to finally get that diagnosis was a huge relief, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not creating this. I've had that too. I had one of the, not nearly at the scale you are, but in my early 20s, I used to be such a hypochondriac, to the point where I would give myself near permanent anxiety and panic attacks. And when I went in the ER once, and they put a EKG on me, and they're like, you are stressed and all of your other markers are fine. Get out of here. And it was, I can easily see why someone would say that, but not for your breadth and range and persistence of symptoms. Like, I don't know if anyone's going to give themselves seizures because there's a brain gut disconnection. That's just an interesting accusation.
Isn't it crazy? And I was in my 30s before someone finally paid attention to my heart. And actually Mayo Clinic was the first one that found my heart issues. And they sent me home. So of course I fly back with a Holter monitor, but it was not the kind that you have to push. It was the kind that goes off on its own. It's like really high tech at that point. And so even if you're not feeling something, it's going to pick up on it.
Yeah.
And again, I had one of my episodes. My heart's like, 290 some beats a minute. And I literally, my son was in the high chair, thankfully strapped in. I lay on the floor. You wake up 10 minutes later, it's over. And they immediately called. They're like, we need you to come back right away. And they found it, but they're like, you have skirted death your whole life. And yet not a single doctor, other than to tell me to stop drinking coffee or drinking alcohol as a teenager, as a college student, did an EKG, did nothing. And that's the part that's frustrating. Like, my oldest is now a doctor. She's in residency. And, she got so upset because of course, my book goes at the beginning of this, like before my kids were ever born, go through high school and all my symptoms. And she's like, Mom, I'm so mad for you. I'm so mad at all the doctors I work with for you. Because, it's so easy to get blown off, especially like you're talking about, if you complain of, headaches or chest pain or fatigue or, and I know if people abuse the system, they do. But even fibromyalgia, I can never say that word, fibromyalgia, which for a while there was the thing that everybody wrote off as, the let's just give you a title because we don't know what's wrong with you and you're probably faking it.
The amorphous neurodegenerative, something's going on with your nervous system, but there's no real concrete test thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're finally getting on board with, hey, let's look at their inflammation. Maybe their inflammation's through the roof. Maybe they're neurotoxic.
Yeah. What do they look at for inflammation? Do they do like interleukin 6, 9? What do they, I'm always curious what people use for like inflammation or markers of inflammation. Did they ever tell you?
They can look for a few things. The standard is to look at a SED rate.
Okay.
And you know, I mean, that's going to show if you have some hardcore acute inflammation in your body. But then, like you were mentioning, there's some other tests, and I don't know the names of all of them.
C-reactive peptide or any of the
yeah.
Okay.
Which we all have some level of inflammation, right? And again, that can even be one of those things that people get treated for, that it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to hurt you to reduce your inflammation. You know, no point. Just say, turn it. I wish I kept my inflammation around. So it's one of those foundational approaches we can take for everybody, which is beautiful.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So yes, if I were your daughter, I would have also had to process some trauma for you, or just be super pissed at the establishment. I mean, when you hear like all the stories, whenever someone says the medical establishment, that is the perfect painted picture of the medical establishment, just kind of brushing everything off with like, you know, some nice cheap tests would have hopefully caught something. The reluctance to do tests is always very interesting to me. Were these specialists, were these general practitioners, family doctors, like what characteristic of medical professional just doesn't want to do tests? Who did you run into, so to speak?
I mean, I had them all. I had primary care. We went to specialists. I saw cardiologists. You know, at one point they had me on Topamax and a couple other things that just had me, you know, loopy and Ativan, narcotics. I did the narcotic route too for a while. So I was just stoned. I still have chest pain, right? But I was still stoned. Or when my migraines wouldn't go away, I was stoned, but my migraine was still there. I just didn't care, right? It was all of them. Wow. And honestly, you know, it's not, I must say, for those people listening, it's not the doctor's fault. I mean, they're put into a box where, you know, they're giving 15 minutes. Then at 15 minutes, they probably have to write all their notes too, right? And so, you know, you only see them for 2 minutes, and they charge all that money to the insurance, and then the insurance puts parameters around what they're allowed to do. Like, you can't go get an MRI now if you're injured without doing physical therapy, and they make them jump through hoops, honestly. And that's why so many doctors are now going into the private, you know, functional medicine route. But then, hey, insurance won't work with those, so now, you know, you got to pay a couple $100 to see one and actually have them sit down with you for an hour and listen and feel heard. You know, it's our medical system that's broken. It's not the doctors themselves.
Yeah, I blame insurance for the most part. It's usually the incentives, and there's very little incentive. It's always what you can get out of insurance. So I usually tie it back to most anything is always the insurance companies dictates what the people who you actually would go to help for are able to do. The level of care that you receive is who's paying them. Yeah, unfortunately, it's their livelihood too.
Yeah. I mean, there's a time and a place for everything. I mean, I was pretty granola before I got sick, but I'll tell you, I mean, I needed the medicine. I would not have survived. And I did quite a while of oral antibiotics, antifungals, you know, antivirals, the whole 9 yards. And I've been sick for so long. And while I wasn't on antibiotics before, when I had the Lyme, we still have to remember that still causes inflammation in the body, and inflammation is still going to cause the leaky gut in the system, right? So my gut was actually so tore up that we got to a point where she's like, you're just pretty much putting these in the toilet. And I had to go the IV route. So again, I needed it. My daughter needed it. There's a time and a place, but it's unfortunate though, when that kind of stuff is also out of pocket. You know, none of our IV therapy was covered.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so let's bring the hope back in. So you got a diagnosis, and I'm sure that transitioned something. So where did you start finding relief?
Well, the doctor who did the test, right? Obviously, she started treating all of us, and like I said, we started with orals. And for those who aren't familiar, you know, we're told with antibiotics, if you don't finish it, right, you'll get resistant. So if you have 10 days of you know, an antibiotic and you only take 7, oh no, that's so bad, right? Well, they're starting to figure out that's not always the case, because especially with the spirochetes, they come in multiple forms, right? And they can develop and hide into cysts, kind of like with biofilms. And so you have to pulse. You have to hit them, and then right when they go try to hide inside of their cyst and get away, you take a break. And then they kind of peek out the door and they say, okay, it's safe. And they come out again and then you hit them again, right? Wow. So we did the pulsing, and along with the antibiotics, you have to pulse in the antifungals, because of course the concern is we're killing your gut. They know we're killing. I mean, one round of antibiotics destroys 40% of your microbiome.
Yeah.
So, if you think about all these long-term antibiotics, and which again, the standard doctors don't give you, they give you 30 days of doxy and they don't think about anything else, right? If you're lucky, you may get somebody that goes, go to the grocery store and pick up a probiotic, but otherwise they don't. And so they bring in the antifungals, right? Because they need to do that as they're killing off all of your good microbiome, right? And then they pull in the antivirals, but they pulse them and they stack them. And they know, which ones are going to hit across the blood-brain barrier, which ones are going to do, just different things. And we did that. And I will tell you, for the good news, my son responded beautifully. So between, I had already started to biomedically treat him when I thought he was autistic. And so, I was doing the whole, he's deficient in magnesium, and chase him around the house with magnesium crushed up and in water and shove it down his throat. And he was already starting to respond for those things. But then to bring in that Lyme treatment just completely flipped him. I mean, he went, I told you, from 2 points from being actually diagnosed as mentally retarded to gifted.
Whoa.
Yeah. So after we homeschooled for a while, and I was still getting sick and he had to go to school, we put him in a private school, and they're like, we've never taken a homeschooler before. How do we know that, he's up to par, blah, blah, blah. And they gave him an IQ test. And as soon as he came back, they were like, welcome aboard. Anything's behind him, we'll catch him up.
What do you think that comes from? Is that just like nutrition able to get into the brain due to like the reduction in inflammation, or how do you think that affects, I'm assuming, brain chemistry so viscerally? What do you think's going on there?
I think that we know that Lyme, right, and Babesia and all of them, we know they can get into the brain, right?
Okay.
And we know that there's inflammation. We know that if the body is inflamed, it's not going to detox appropriately, right? And toxins move from high concentration to low. So as the body fills up with toxins, of course, the brain's going to become neurotoxic. And I think it's all of that. I think, when we talk about inflammation, I have a client I worked with for a long time who was somebody who, she was Italian, right? She's like, my mother, when I was upset, fed me food. So she'd never dieted in her whole life. And it didn't come to me for weight, but came to me because she was sick. And we talked about an anti-inflammatory diet, and I had to walk her through. And when it was time to bring foods back, she reacted to every single one. And she's like, this is stuff I've eaten my whole life. I don't understand, right? And the way I explained it to her is, when you're inflamed, and it's almost like taking pillows and putting them on the wire coat hanger that your parents used for the TV, right? Are you going to get reception? No. So is this wire antenna going to talk to that one over there? No, because you've got all the pillows around it blocking it. But when you bring that inflammation off, right, thinking of our body and the way it communicates, it's finally able to communicate. So the human body does. I mean, I feel like humans are the only people that are not intuitive. You watch a deer outside go up to a bush and he smells it, and then he stops, and he'll take one bite and then he'll wait. And it's like he's listening to his body, right? To say, okay, do I need to eat more of this or not? They just know, and we don't. Or, we're horrible about it. But I think that's a part of it, is we've forgotten how to listen to our body. And then, of course, the more inflamed we are living in a toxic world, the more our body isn't able to communicate.
There's just so much noise.
It is.
I mean, even if your hormones are sending a signal, it's just hard to actually hear it until it gets to a screaming level. Yeah.
I went before I really understood it. I used to make a joke that I could have a drink, an alcoholic beverage, and instantly I'd feel like crap. My head could hurt within 5 minutes, and I'd go, okay, it's telling me I shouldn't have any more. But if I drink every night for days on end, after a couple of days, the headache goes away. And I'd be like, oh, my body was like, screw you, you're not listening, and that's kind of what it's doing. But now I know it's because I was actually becoming even more inflamed because I don't respond well to the alcohol. That whole screw you, I'm not going to talk to you anymore really was accurate, but it's because all of a sudden there's pillows and inflammation around the antennas again. So I don't think I'm getting a headache is a good thing. In reality, it's worse than if I did get a headache because my body's not communicating.
Yeah. Yeah. Well put. Did you find any throughout that are antibiotics the only treatment, or are there any sort of functional, nutritional, therapeutic things you can do in that situation?
There is, if somebody really is diagnosed, as much as I love natural approaches and I believe in all of them and I do them in my own practice, this is a place where I would say get the antibiotics. Let's get ahead of it, because I want to limit any chance that you're going to have permanent damage, from this. But you can bring in herbals. My family and I, I'm a big essential oil person, which I'm looking at a whole wall of oils.
Yeah.
And we did an essential oil protocol for a while. And even when our antibiotics stopped, what I started to do was layer herbals on top of the antibiotics. So as we titrated down off the antibiotics, the herbals continued for a while. And that kind of gave me what I like to call the back out plan.
Yeah.
So you've got the herbals there, but as you're titrating down the antibiotics, if everything starts coming back, at least, you've got a frontline defense here until you can get those antibiotics back in. And that was important to me, especially because with IVs, I did 3 years of IV antibiotics. And talk about getting attached to a PICC line.
Yeah.
And during that time, there were several times where I couldn't take it anymore. I lost my benchmark. I'm like, I don't know if these symptoms are a side effect of the medicines, or these symptoms actually because of Lyme, and of course I feel guilty at this point. We've sacrificed so much to pay for this, that I take the PICC line out, and it was amazing because pretty quickly I'd start to feel bad again, and they'd be like, "We told you not to do that," and the PICC line would go back in. So I think it's nice to have those other options for people, because you're not going to get rid of Lyme. I'm sorry, I'm the believer that it's still there, right? It's when you think about treatments and even epigenetics and bringing in things that kind of can help boost your immune system and keep it at bay, and maybe flip that switch, that's fine, but it doesn't mean it's gone. You can put yourself in remission from diabetes, but you go hang out in the closet and eat a dozen donuts, 6 pack of beer every day for a month on end. It's going to come back, right? You're going to flip that switch again. And these spirochetes tend to, of course, they like to hide. They get into the spinal fluid, they get into the brain. So I think you always have it, and you need to definitely have a toolbox full of those herbals and different things to bring in when you need them. And you won't need them every day. I mean, I definitely take supplements every day, but it depends. It also depends what else you have going on.
Yeah.
So I have mast cell activation, and because of that, I have heart damage from it as well. I have something that's called Kunis syndrome. And so the degradation of histamines too quickly from my mast cells will actually cause coronary artery spasms, and I'll have a heart attack if I don't bring in, again, Western medicine. I need nitro. And like, one of the biggest things that causes mast cell activation is vector-borne diseases. And I say vector-borne only because now, mosquitoes, fleas, cats, they're all carrying these, not just ticks now. But that and mold. And then when you think about people who have Lyme and they say, I've been treated, but I still have symptoms. Okay, there's a good chance you've either got mold, parasites, mast cell activation, one of these underlying conditions that need to be addressed too.
Can you go more into mast cell activation? Because I don't know what that fully.
Yeah, absolutely. So our mast cells, they carry a bunch of things in there, one of which is histamines. Of course, you're going to get, your cytokines, all of those things that come out as their emergency response. So the mast cells respond when there's an issue. All right. So if you think about think of them like bouncers at a bar. They're there, they're ready. And then when the bar owner says, hey, I need you, there's a fight over there, go take care of it, go throw them out. They activate, right? And they come over and they kick butt, and they release all of the, you know, the epinephrine, the cytokines, the histamine, you name it, and they take care of the problem, right? So best way to think about it is the bouncer of the bar.
Yeah.
But physically, that's going to be the stuffy nose, the runny nose, the hives, the all of the emergency response things you think. And there's more than one level, obviously, because you've got the immediate reaction when your body senses something's wrong. You've got the one that comes a couple hours later, and then one that goes even longer. But one of the things it does release is histamines, and so for me, that's the problem. Now, when you have mast cell activation, it means that your body has continued to activate them even though there's no problem, right? So the bar owner's telling that bouncer there's still a problem, and there's really not. He's just going to kicking out people for no reason. And you have to calm them down. And they say there's no cure for it, but I do think I wouldn't use the word cure, but there is a way to be treated and be asymptomatic or keep it under control. No different than diabetes, right?
Right.
And that is addressing the underlying cause. So the two biggest things for mast cell, like I said, are mold and the vector-bornes. But there's other things that can do it too. And so that's very, very common for people with Lyme to end up with mast cell.
So you just described what I would think of as the manifestation of an autoimmune condition, where your body's response doesn't turn off. Is that similar, or is autoimmune just a broader umbrella term for things that may include mast cell activation, or is that a very specific case?
It's similar. So mast cell is not an autoimmune condition. They're like different arms of the immune system. But what can happen is you can actually have mast cell kind of irritate and activate the autoimmune arm, and vice versa. So it is very, very common for somebody with mast cell to also have autoimmune. But does one hit the other? No. It's kind of like Lyme is not necessarily an autoimmune disease. A lot of people refer to it as one.
Right.
It's because, again, it activates and can cause autoimmune disease.
Okay. I would love to get into some autoimmune and or Hashimoto's. Is there more to Lyme for it to feel more complete, for ways to mitigate, or any other crucial information in that area?
I would just want to say, and I can talk into any of this at any point, and anybody who listens to this and has questions, I'm more than happy. This is my soapbox. I think I got Lyme for a reason, to help people, but it's not just as easy as taking medicines, right? We really do need to think of the foundations. And so, like, my approach is always, I enhance Western medicine, whether they've already done it or they are in the process of it, because I do bring in the herbals and the binders and the biofilm disruptors. But more importantly, I focus on those foundations, right? Because you've got to make sure your downstream pathways are open. We've got to detox. It's very common for people who get really sick with Lyme to have a methylation defect. I have never in my practice, honest to goodness, had somebody come to me with chronic Lyme that did not have MTHFR defect, which, again, you have trouble methylating. And so, there's lots of different ones, but that's very, very common. And so we want to open those pathways. We want to make sure illness is lonely. You and I talked about this. So we want to make sure mindset's good, but diet is huge. You've got to get the inflammation down. It's not just a matter of saying, okay, I'm not going to go to McDonald's anymore. There's lots of inflammatory foods in the standard American diet. We know that. But now that you're sick, and this goes for autoimmune disease too, is now that you're, I don't want to say sick, I shouldn't say that. Now that you have a condition that we know is increasing the inflammation in the body, and you've already got symptoms, now you're going to have trigger foods. You're going to have foods that a healthy person, it would not make them inflamed. It would not hurt them, but is going to trigger you. And these are things that we have to take out for a time to calm the system down, and then we can bring them back in. And so for somebody that has Lyme, they just need to understand there's no easy button, in that, even if they think they've tried all the things, if they have symptoms, they can still improve. We just have to layer all these different modalities, take that multifaceted approach.
Yeah, I love the way you put that. And you mentioned at the beginning, but I didn't want to interrupt you, and we'll probably move into it now. You mentioned anti-inflammatory diet. That's, I think, what everyone, that's the buzz term now, which I'm really happy with, because the diet wars get overwhelming. Just the nutritional dogma battles over different modalities of eating. I think what most people would be really happy with is just anti-inflammatory foods. That's a good non-dogmatic approach, and that's actually what I love. That's why I went with primal health coaching. Is it's kind of the, like, these are, they have the different. I'm currently doing a functional therapeutic diet specialization, and it's here, someone brings the manifestation symptoms, and it's which foods might be triggering this. So it's the targeted anti-inflammatory approach. So if you would, I would love to hear that. And if it fits nicely into a Hashimoto's discussion, then go for it.
Oh yeah. Okay. You ready? And
Yes.
I love primal, by the way. So anti-inflammatory, when we think of that, we think of, to me, that is the first diet, right? And we can layer lots of things, which I do. And sometimes, especially if you start talking into what an anti-inflammatory diet is, people are like, oh my gosh, there'll be nothing left to eat.
Yeah.
But they need to look at it as lowering inflammation and bringing up nutrient density, right? So we're adding in foods too that you probably never even thought to eat in the world because it was so easy to drive to McDonald's, right?
Right.
There's so many foods. And when I do an anti-inflammatory diet with them, we do a short time where it's pretty strict, but it's again, because I know, just like anything else with epigenetics, that if we bring in these modalities, we can turn that light switch of overreactivity off. And once we have it off, we bring foods back in and we figure out a personalized anti-inflammatory diet just for that person, right? So somebody may be able to have the occasional glass of wine, but not red peppers. And somebody else can maybe have red peppers, but not be able to bring in, cow milk or whatever. And I know you know that. So it really does become very specific to them. And I think that diet should be carried all the way. Like one of the programs I have is even called Cleaner Keto. And I do it on purpose because I can't stand dirty keto. But I think keto has a place in a healing journey as well. But I layer it, right? We're still going to take that anti-inflammatory diet and now we're going to layer keto into it. Or, for my nutrition program for people with Lyme, we lay in, depending what you have, a mold, a mycotoxin exposure overlay, a histamine intolerant overlay, SIBO, all of the things.
SIBO is a big one too.
SIBO is a huge one too, yeah. And Candida, we all have Candida, right? Or parasites. And so you can layer them in, and again, just for a time, because that particular issue is not meant to stay forever, right? If we fix the SIBO, you're not going to be on SIBO diet the rest of your life, but you'll still have your base anti-inflammatory diet. And once you're feeling good, which I'd like to say asymptomatic, but some people decide that, they feel great at 90%, they don't want to push further. But once you get where you're in your happy place, then you can go into more of a I don't want to even say 80-20 because that's a lot, but maybe I tend to be more of a 90-10. So, if you go out with your family to restaurants on the weekend and you are a little bit more relaxed in your food, but then you just get right back at it. It's not like you're in prison for the rest of your diet prison for the rest of your life. And so that's how I look at it is, we really optimize what's exactly right for you. And then we consider the overlays for a time. And that brings me into autoimmune. Autoimmune responds so well to an anti-inflammatory diet because we know, right, inflammation is the root cause of all disease. That's been determined. It's been in magazines and in articles. It's like, I'm not making that one up. And autoimmune is about the body becoming overreactive, right, and responding to itself. And also we know that inflammation causes leaky gut, right, opens those junction barriers, and that autoimmune can be caused by the fact that undigested proteins leak out of the gut, right? The body sees them and develops antibodies against them. So in terms of just generic autoimmune disease, that diet I have found works wonderful for them, period, brings the inflammation down. I had a client who, her autoimmune disease was severe enough that every month She was out of work for a couple of days,
Mm.
monthly. And she, she worked for the government. She had a pretty important job. And she was like, she came in hoping to just drop it down. Like, can I just maybe not call out every 2 months or whatever? And she was a great example of somebody who didn't completely go as deep as I would have put her in autoimmune before she all of a sudden she was great. And I haven't seen her in 2 years. And she recently let me know she hasn't had a flare in 2 years.
Nice.
Like, it's possible. Now, Hashimoto's, even more. When you bring in the thyroid, that's huge, because a couple of things can happen. And one of them is proteins. These undigested proteins can actually land on the thyroid.
Yeah.
So the body can inadvertently develop Hashimoto's because it's trying to attack those proteins and not the thyroid itself. So
how would you describe Hashimoto's? What's the symptomology for anyone who has weird symptoms of exactly what you're going to describe and doesn't know what it might be?
All right. So I'll go backwards. So Hashimoto's is autoimmune hypothyroid. Okay. So you get a thyroid panel for reasons I'll explain. Okay. And one of the things they test for is antibodies, and it's positive, right? They'll probably send you to get an ultrasound to make sure, do you have nodules, all that good stuff. But if you have antibodies, right? So your body has developed antibodies to your thyroid, that is when Hashimoto's comes in. Now, if you get a panel done and you're hypo, meaning your thyroid's not doing its job, it's a little slow and sluggish and lazy, but you don't have antibodies, you just have hypothyroid. And these can happen for a couple of reasons. But first, the symptoms are, of course, weight gain. We all know that one, right? And weight gain in the midsection, kind of like menopause weight, is very common. But it's also, think about fatigue, dry skin, mood changes. A lot of people with hypothyroid get depressed, low sex drive, constipation. And again, it's broad symptoms, but once you get them, you'll lose, if you have hypothyroid for a while, you'll lose like the tail of your eyebrow. So the third over here, which mine are penciled in for that very reason. And so if you have any of these symptoms, even the depression, and you're getting enough sunlight or you're supplementing with some vitamin D, then they should have their thyroid checked. A lot of doctors will only check their TSH, which is the standard. I'm going to go run your, a CBC and a CMP. So the standard blood work, and they check just the TSH. And that's really not good enough. The TSH actually does not come from the thyroid. It comes from the pituitary. So the TSH is what the pituitary sends out to yell at the thyroid, right? And that's why people who are low, actually have a high TSH. People always get that mixed up back and forth, right?
Not being absorbed and converted by the thyroid.
What's that?
Is the TSH not being metabolized or received by the thyroid? Is that why
it's not being received?
Yeah,
it's being ignored. So the pituitary is screaming. So the TSH goes high. Do your job, do your job, do your job. The thyroid's not doing its job. And yet that's where you need the panel, because we need to look at your T3 and your T4. So your T4 is your storage form, and 90% of what's produced is produced as T4, but it needs to be converted to T3 in order to be used by the cells. So for the cells to get in, and you can have a normal TSH and still have a problem where your T3 and T4 are off. And so that's important for people, because people go to the doctor and because they feel like crap. They're sure it's their thyroid, and the doctor goes, "You're fine." Okay, no, you probably only had a TSH run, right? So you got to figure out what to do. And so that's where that comes in, is we have to decide, is this a messaging problem? Is this a conversion problem? And we need to work on your gut and your liver. Is this a cell problem? Because sometimes people actually have all the symptoms of hypothyroid, but yet their panel comes back normal. And then we have to say, okay, are the cells so inflamed, there's that word again, right, that the receptors are not allowing the message to go in order to upregulate ATP. So that's another thing that sometimes can happen too. But all of these things improve when you reduce inflammation, right? And then you start working on your microbiome and your gut health.
Yeah. What are some of the big things nutritionally for anti-inflammation? Like, what are the massive ones without having to know anyone's specific case that you'll be like, either get rid of this or add these nutritionally for anti-inflammation?
My first four right off the bat are going to be processed oil, sugar. You think about all the addictive people out here, they're like, man, dairy.
Yep.
And gluten.
Yeah, you just named Primal.
Yeah, yep. those are the big ones. And then, people start feeling good because at first they're like, man, I don't get rid of this stuff. There's nothing left in life. There's no joy. But as soon as they start feeling better, then you're like, okay, can we move it to all grains for a little while? Can we look at maybe bringing this in? And they seem more, open once they actually start seeing it work. But
and once you get rid of the hyperpalatability and the just like dopamine hits you get from food, your entire palate and cravings change, and food gets more interesting by itself.
Absolutely.
Which is the thing that is really hard to tell someone and have them believe it until they do it.
Yeah, it's true. You stop craving it, and you actually, it doesn't sound appealing to you. I did an anti-inflammatory diet, and I didn't even hardly bring in reintroductions. I did 3 reintroductions in 11 months because I was feeling so good. And I remember, finally bringing stuff in, and it just doesn't taste the same. It's gross.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously
chemically
do it, yeah, but it's so different, and you'll get to the point where like strawberries are dessert because they're so sweet. Your palate, yeah.
I'm glad you named that. You said processed oil. Do you differentiate between sort of vegetable oil with like the super high rancid omega-6 content and more saturated versions of oils, any of that?
Yeah. So all the processed rancid oils are high in omega-6, as we know.
Yeah, the liquid ones on the shelf.
Yeah, and that's why fast food's so high in it.
Yeah.
So on a side note, that's why if anybody needs supplemented with any kind of omega, I try to really push to do omega-3 for a little while until we get that back in balance, because we're all out of balance. Our omega-6 is too high, and they actually determined that 3 is supposed to be, if not equal, even up to 4 times higher than 6, which none of us are. So side note, that was the soapbox. But
side note, I just did it's funny you should say that. I just got involved in a test-based nutrition company called Zinzino, and their flagship test I did, and I put it off for a year. I did a podcast with another Primal guy, the Primal Swede, and he does the tests, and I put it off because I was profoundly terrified that I didn't know as much about nutrition as I thought I did. I just got my results back, and I was shocked for about an hour. It was basically as bad as the standard American diet when my tests came back. It was 30-1 omega-6 to omega-3, which is obviously way higher than it should be. And they crunch a bunch of other numbers like omega-3 to saturated fat. They give you a fatty acid breakdown from the saturated fats, which omega-9, omega-6, omega-3, and all that. And thankfully, they also have a very interesting, they call it a balance oil, but it's essentially a special formula of cod liver oil. They have a vegan version with polyphenols so that your stomach doesn't make them go rancid before you get to them, which is why pills sometimes don't work so well. So the test is your diet working? That's the marketing behind it, which I'm now doing, because I was like, well, I guess my diet wasn't working. And like you said, it's simply, whenever I sort of screamed at him because I was pretty pissed off, he was like, no one gets enough omega-3. Like, unless you're doing a concerted effort, and even with the 20%, like, playing around, going out to eat, like you said, you're just getting bombarded with rancid omega-6s. And unless you're specifically eating omega-3 rich foods, like I eat a lot of steak, but those aren't super high enough in, omega-3, grass-fed, red meat, whatever. So it tends to be a lot of fish and a lot of marine things that'll raise that, and their oil has that in it. But yeah, my inflammatory markers on that level were just like same as everyone else, and I was pissed.
But you know what? It's nice for people to hear that, because at least then they know, we're human, and we're always a work in progress.
Yeah. And the nice part about it is I asked him, the way they run it is it's a 4-month supply of oil. And I was like, okay, so what are the average? How does it move? And he's like, if you're around 30-1 on average, countries are different, but people will go down to like around 4-1 or 3-1. And I was like, whoa, in 4 months, it moves it that much. And he's like,
that's a lot.
Yeah, omega-3 is it's literally just so much missing omega-3. It's just
Mhm.
hard to get now. So
Well, the
that was
polyphenol
helpful.
thing is smart too, and that's one of the
Yeah,
things with the research that they're working on even for mast cell, because they were trying to think about bringing stuff in large quantities, but it
yeah,
goes rancid, right? And it
right.
actually starts to cause bad microbiota growth in your
Right.
microbiome, kind of shifts that a little bit. So they were like, okay, but if we bring in the polyphenols,
Yeah.
it really does make a big difference.
The shift towards the reason I like Primal is kind of the focus on bioavailability. Just like, yeah, all of these things are in foods, but can you get to them? Like, not a huge fan of like raw cruciferous vegetables anymore, because I mean that's one of the things that exacerbated my partner's Hashimoto's. She can't do raw cruciferous. There's just a
Okay.
number of things that are, I mean, anti-nutrients are a thing. They just bind to the things you're going for, and it's almost
Yep.
like they weren't there, and then they cause other damage. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was my omega-3 little
Well,
tangent.
I love, I'm gonna call them tangents because I go all the time.
Yeah,
So you're with good company. And in the you mentioned, I just lost my train of thought where I was going with
I
that.
mentioned raw cruciferous vegetables maybe.
No, you were talking about food and getting it being bioavailable with your food. But the truth
Oh
is,
yeah,
our soils are depleted and food is void of
yeah,
nutrients at this point. So even the healthiest person is
yeah,
lacking in it.
yeah.
They did a study and found that Florida oranges have no vitamin C left in them. It's so sad. So even somebody who's listening to us right now who says, but I don't have autoimmune or Hashimoto's or mast cell or Lyme or any of those things, don't be so certain that you don't need to supplement, at least for a time, to get those balances back where
Yeah.
they need to be.
Yeah, and I'm also in the agricultural space, so in the regenerative ag space and the organic and permaculture, and even in that, it's really difficult to regenerate soil. Like
Yeah,
it
it's very
depletes
slow.
very quickly. I mean, it's coming, and the large amount of awareness on it is there. Not necessarily mainstream yet, but maybe more and more people are doing it on social media that I see at least, so it's not so fringe anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So slowly soil is being regenerated and the nutritional availability and nutrient density is coming back, but it's a concerted awareness and effort. Yeah, it's pretty easy to dig yourself into a hole, and it's a little harder to get out.
That is very, very true. It's with health, it's the same way. Now
Right.
tell me you've been to Polyface. You're not that far away.
I'm not that far away. I have yet to be to Polyface.
Oh,
I have
I
not met
loved it.
Joel Salatin yet.
Yeah, I did, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
And so if we can just get more like him, maybe our
Crazy farmer
will be better.
ranchers. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You need to
Okay.
be a little nutty to do that many experiments. And I love the mad scientist farmers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Be more worried about also the outcome in the health of all of us versus making a dollar too, because
Yeah,
it's
I mean, he
expensive
found a
to.
profitable model. So he was, I mean, it takes a pioneer. He was the pioneer in the sort of the rotational animal space. And there's a number of other, like I learned how to grow microgreens from a couple pioneers in that space. It's not attractive to my generation unless you can make like actual money from it. And
Mhm.
it took a couple of people who are probably now in their 40s or 50s to do the hard work and figure out how to actually make a living from it. And now it's more appealing to people in their 20s who are just like, oh, I'm going to do this because it's viable, right? I'm not going to be a poor striving farmer necessarily.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I promise we'll get back on track, but everything you're saying reminds me of the movie Wall-E. Do you remember
Yeah.
Wall-E? Did you ever see that?
Yeah, that's true. That's a great
Saving
movie.
Our
It's
Planet.
yeah.
So we stopped when we were talking about rancid oil.
Yes.
I don't know if your followers know what rancid oils are and what oils are good.
Well, if you could touch on it briefly. Yeah.
Um, so when I think of rancid oils, obviously we were talking about the restaurant oils that are high omega-6, but any of your safflower oil, your peanut oil, your canola oil, and contrary to what a lot of doctors, standard medicine will tell you out there, bacon fat is good for you. You want, your lard, your tallow, your duck fat, your coconut oil, your grass-fed butter. If you can't do that, you can have ghee, olive oil, avocado oil. Those are the good oils that we consider anti-inflammatory.
Yeah, they're stable, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
I think
Oh,
what
and that too. Yeah.
yeah. So when you cook with them, they don't immediately break down. When I think of rancid, I think of rust. It's a kind of a good analogy. It's
Mm-hmm.
broken or corrupted molecular form. It's no longer a whole version of itself. It's oxidized, like there are atoms or electrons missing from it, and it doesn't function as it would have in its whole form in your body. And it turns into oxidative damage and inflammation, which is what we've been talking about. And then you need anti-inflammatory just to counteract the effect of eating it. So yeah.
Yes. Yep. You got it.
Rusting. Yeah. So things that are solid fat at room temperature, there's a couple that are different. So avocado oil and olive oil, obviously, but those have polyphenols in them. And the whole thing that, I mean, cholesterol is the reason people were avoiding those, because it's been just demonized and bastardized since Ansel Keys and been 50 years. But that's coming around, thankfully, with the carnivore movement and people not having heart attacks, just eating meat and just doing real well. So the evidence-based literature is coming back on it, where if you strip the, a lot of the processed crap off of meat and you just do clean meat, then it's almost neutral. It's absolutely fine. So it's coming slowly, but it's making its way into the mainstream. And what else was I going with that? Oh yeah, a lot of the cooking literature doesn't like the they focus on smoke points, but like you were saying, it's what polyphenols are packaged with the thing. So olive oil is actually still one of the better ones to cook with, even at high temperatures, because the polyphenols in real olive oil, unless it's mixed with safflower oil or sunflower, right? Well, the expensive stuff neutralizes that. So it's still okay to cook with. You're just missing the benefits of it that you would get from the polyphenols. So olive oil and avocado oil are usually the ones that I'll be like, no, those are okay with. They're liquid at room temperature, but they're fruit oils, oddly enough, right? So an avocado is a fruit, which is odd to think about, but
some of the farm-to-table restaurants are even starting to use them more, which is nice, especially if you go into this, I say the city. If you go into more, metropolitan areas, you'll get some really nice tables for the yuppies that'll the restaurants do that.
Yeah, I have plenty of those in Asheville, but even then you have to request olive oil. Yeah. Okay. And it's not that they're expensive, it's that the other ones are so ridiculously cheap because they were a byproduct of industry. Like most of those oil, like grapeseed oil, most of those were waste products that farmers just figured out a way to sell. Like they weren't supposed to be consumed. They just happened to find a market for them in cheap cooking oils, because they do taste good. Like, deep fried food does taste delicious, but
and you say marketing, I think about Five Guys, because they market very proud. We only use peanut oil. And it's like people, even my husband at one point was like, but they only use peanut oil. Let's go there. And I'm like, babe, do you know what peanut oil is? Come on now.
Right.
They didn't say we only use avocado oil.
Right.
But you fall for that marketing, and people do, because then,
Well, it gets overwhelming. Like the amount of anxiety and stress goes up, even for, people in the literature, whenever you read about how many things have been twisted on their head, the level of awareness that someone has to have when they're just eating to not make themselves sick is really frustrating for most people. They're like, why can't I just eat food? And you're like, if it was pre like World War II, our grandparents, my gram lived till 101, not entirely by herself, but for the most part, they grew up on farms. So it was, how much actual nutrition do you have before the advent of all of these, just heavily processed food-like products, right? Like the fake cheeses and everything that tastes delicious that food scientists just started tweaking with. They are very good at their jobs.
Yes, they were.
How do you differentiate sugar? So you said sugar is one of the one. What do you mean by sugar?
Processed sugar. I think that natural sugars, and when I say natural, I think about, coconut sugar, maple
molasses.
Syrup, molasses, honey. Yeah, especially raw honey is great. But even those, if you're somebody who is trying to lose weight, or maybe, you have hormone imbalance, you have some blood sugar issues, even those should be used in moderation, if at all. I tend to leave them in, but I'm also finding that more people are insulin resistant than we realize too.
Yeah.
So, if your fasting glucose is coming back a little high, then I'm going to take those away from you too, just for time. Just to stabilize things. Yeah. But mainly it's the processed stuff. That's the big one, and then even I recently did a masterclass, for my membership people about stevia. I mean, there's some pros and cons
Yeah.
to that as well. And that's a big buzz one too. But if you're somebody who is into those kind of sugars, so you're thinking erythritol, stevia, xylitol, all those. Stevia is one of the least offenders, I will say.
Yeah. Does it matter which rep it is? So which strain? Because there's a rep A, rep B, and obviously the cheaper one is used in more things. Yeah.
And it needs to be pure. So you got to when you go to the grocery store, you got to make sure it's not been cut with any of those other artificial sugars that cause cancer. But then it's not bad.
Yeah.
It does. It's funny because it doesn't damage your microbiome. Like, it doesn't kill the microbiota.
Stevia doesn't.
But it does.
Good. That's really good to know.
To stop communicating for a little while.
Oh,
So it's kind of like they're just looking around. You don't want to have it very often. I will say I give my son a little stevia once in a while because he wants something sweet. I mean, he's a teen. I try very hard to make sure that he gets to be like his friends and not, completely ostracize him. But so I think there's a place for stevia for sure.
Okay, honestly. Good to know. Yeah, there's a lot of good data around like the problem whenever they do tests with like honey. Like, I love raw honey, but all of the literature is on Manuka honey. All of the beneficial stuff they find, the positive effects on dropping or reducing blood glucose compared to normal honey, and the antimicrobial effects, and like that's just all raw Manuka honey, and almost no one is going to actually seek out raw Manuka honey at a grocery store.
What they need to seek out is the honey that has been collected from their area,
right? Too. Local honey,
especially with seasonal allergies,
unprocessed local honey.
Yeah. So I'll do that.
You find that has effects on histamines and things like that as well for allergic reactions. Yeah.
Yep. As soon as he starts to have, get the stuffy seasonal allergies, I'll make him every day take a tablespoon and just chugs it down. And we'll put a drop of cinnamon essential oil in the honey to kind of help balance his blood sugar. Yep. He doesn't have blood sugar problems. I mean, he's 17, but still he's going to cause that spike. So I use the cinnamon just to kind of help slow that down a little bit too.
Yeah, cinnamon is a health hack for sure. Blunt blood glucose spike, and apple cider vinegar does the same thing. A lot of good studies on raw apple cider vinegar postprandial, so post meal, will drop it by about 20% pretty quickly. Let's go back to Hashimoto's because I'll forget. Okay. I forgot where we left off. But how about foods that affect and modulate, or the actual? How do you start treating Hashimoto's?
I just start bringing down the anti-inflammatory diet. You mentioned your old partner who
raw cruciferous
vegetables.
Yeah.
And what's surprising is some people tolerate those very well. Yeah. And so you have to weigh, risk versus benefit there, because there are some good nutrients in them.
They are. Yeah.
And so those are one of those things where I would leave them in and see how they did, unless they came in knowing that they couldn't do them. I know there's a lot of there was some theories out there for a while that they made Hashimoto's worse, and then that was debunked.
It did for her symptomatically, and it was a big difference between raw and cooked.
See, that's interesting. Yeah. And but that's when it comes into really bio-individualizing. I have people on an anti-inflammatory diet who couldn't have cauliflower. I'm like, that's white water. How do you not tolerate it? But she couldn't. I mean, it would actually make her throw up. And then I had somebody who couldn't do pumpkin.
Yeah.
Which is very anti-inflammatory. And so there are, more, there's more narrowing down that we do have to do for some people, but I feel like 99% of the time they can just start with the basic anti-inflammatory, see the profound results. If they're not feeling pretty like we've really moved the needle in 30 days, I tend to ask them to backlog. So I hate journaling, hate it with passion, because who has time for that, right? So I usually tell people, then backlog. The moment you have a symptom, write down the last 2 meals you had for me. And then we can usually see a pattern there. And then, as long if we deal with those, so for example, for your partner, we would have seen the cruciferous vegetables and remove those. But then after that, I think that's when it's time to bring those overlays in. If you're not feeling better, there's something else going on, because an anti-inflammatory diet does not necessarily mean it's low histamine, low oxalate, right? You got to think about FODMAP for SIBO and all of that. And so that's when we really, I think something important that I was going to bring up earlier and I forgot to is, as you're talking into all of this and you're talking about primal and what you do with primal and stuff is, and we talked about the analysis paralysis. There's so much information. People could spend hours and hours and hours and days and days and days on the internet and still be like, okay, I don't know where to start. That they really should go to somebody who is trained in it, because we've done the work for them, right? And we can walk through it. We've seen enough clients to know, where to get them started, kind of start weeding through, clear out the white noise, and then, really narrow it down for them. I mean, that's the beauty of why people pay us, I think. I mean, could people spend, 2 weeks on the internet and figure out, oh, let me start with this diet? You could. But then when it doesn't work, or when you have a new symptom pop up, who are you going to ask? You're going to go back to the internet, spend 2 more weeks trying to figure it out. You're going to get frustrated, you're going to quit. So
yeah, most people just get demoralized and frustrated and just accept the symptoms. Yeah. Well, and I don't blame them for that. I mean, it is so easy for me to get analysis paralysis. And if I didn't have like a couple of filters to weed new information through, I can easily get overwhelmed too. Like just with there's still a level of bombardment and cognitive dissonance from things I hear from the like little amount of mainstream nutritional and health information, where like they're still telling me cholesterol is bad, and the new literature on like anti-nutrients and things, and it basically feels like you can't eat anything. If you listen to multiple sources, it will certainly feel like everything's going to kill you. Thomas DeLauer, who's a big metabolic keto guy, did a great little Instagram reel on this. He's like, oh, you definitely can't do fish because the mercury. Eggs and red meat, we've known this forever. Get it out. Nuts and seeds, anti-nutrients and arsenic. And fruit, there's a thing called fructose. Like you can find something bad if you isolate it in literally every food group. And that's why I think the personalized aspect is so important. It has to be very targeted. It's different for everyone. There is no general food plan other than what you said, which is anti-inflammatory, right? There are some things that no one tolerates. Some people tolerate them better, but your body will appreciate it if you cut out seed oils. Like everyone responds better if you cut out gluten and seed oils, although gluten, my girlfriend and will get me to do from time to time because there is something with the experience. But those 4 big things, everyone feels better if they get rid of them.
Absolutely, especially in this country. I mean, you can have gluten in another country and do fine.
Italy is way different. Yeah, it's a different type of wheat. So we changed our wheat in 1954 and it went to dwarf wheat, and it had a higher concentration of the amino acid gliadin. Gluten isn't one thing, right? It's a complex of amino acids. So we have more inflammatory gluten than Italy does, and most of Europe, just because of our agricultural need for increased yield, essentially. Yeah.
We went to Ireland and I was able to have it and I did absolutely fine.
Yep. Yeah, Europe has a way more progressive food policy. And we just have so many chemical companies in the US that have turned into agricultural companies, which have nothing to do with health and nutrition. It's literally just usually increased yield, increased drought tolerance, real problems, but none of those are helpful for human health.
Nope, not at all. I'm with
you. Our bodies don't catch up that quickly.
They do not.
Yeah. Did we finish out on Hashimoto's?
Unless you have further questions about it. Really, if somebody thinks they're having symptoms of it, they really do need to get a complete thyroid panel. I think that's important. That's their first step. And then ask for a copy of it. Even if they're told it's normal, ask for a copy of it and get a second opinion to look at it. And that second opinion may even be, a nutritional practitioner, a health coach, a functional medicine doctor, somebody a little bit more outside the box, because, it's not always about what's within these very liberal parameters of what's okay, with the RDA and all, and the standards with the, it's crazy what they say, right? We're realizing that the amounts are very different, or labs you can feel bad and be within range. And you may find that while you're in range, you're on the ragged edge and you just need optimized.
Right.
And that's all you need. And it could be because if you've had a drastic change where you were a different level for so long, and then all of a sudden you change, you could still be in range, but definitely not optimized for you.
Right.
And there's simple things that people can do to definitely move that needle, even just using the different modalities between food, lifestyle intervention, stress management, and don't have to go into medication, you know?
Right. Yeah. And the thing that, I think we talked about this in my last podcast with sleep, the ranges and what normal means is, like you said, really loose, where normal is what most people can get away with without having some debilitating symptom that is persistent pop up. So if you're like even in the top half of a range trending towards something that's abnormal, that's not necessarily great. Like if you want to be at the very bottom of that range and give yourself the most buffer possible. And I say this and just thinking about my omega test while I'm saying it. I'm just like, it gives such a feeling of like imposter syndrome where you're like, wow, my omegas are at the like bottom range. But yeah, I mean, there's usually a very feasible solution for all of these things. Like some people like to say food doesn't dictate everything. I mean, it's like 80% of everything other than like genetics, which is, it's the vast, big mover.
Yeah, I would even go as high as even more than 80%, to be honest with you. I mean, you can't out exercise it, right? And I'll say this, because I think this is important. It's going to apply to you too. I know you made a joke about imposter syndrome, which I think everybody has. I think doctors probably even have it, you know, sometimes. But I think for me, I always tell people I'm a work in progress. You know, I got lots of broken parts I work on all the time, because I think people need to know where you're coming from. And I'm a big believer that experience outweighs, you know, a college degree. I go to a physician who actually lived it and survived it before I'd ever go to somebody with, you know, 17 things on their wall framed. And so I think that's important for people to know, is that we're all a work in progress, right? We all have inflammation in our body. All of our bodies make toxins. So we all have some level of toxicity. It's just, we have the tools. We know, you know, how to keep it down, how to manage it, how to optimize it, and how to personalize it, whether it's for us or somebody else. But you're still exposed to things that you have no control over when it comes to your omega-6, you know? But look what you did. You were smart enough to know a good company and vet it. And you see what I'm saying? And that's the part that people need to hone in on, is not, oh, Alex has as high omega-6 that he's not right for me to help me with my nutrition. Instead, because he had it and he knew who to go to, he's exactly the person that they need to go to. Does that make sense?
And the like level of the percentage of people that would even know what that means, that's just my own weird like filter coming at myself, where it's like, oh, what are the other health coaches gonna like? No,
I think
one.
of that all the time too, but honestly, we just need to stand strong in our stuff. And you know, I'll tell you that why I have plenty of credentials, that's not what gave me what I have today. It's living all that. It's the fact that I do have, you know, more diagnoses than than thinkers, I think. One of which is Hashimoto's and one of which is Lyme. So
you had another big one in your profile. Was it mycotoxins?
I had mycotoxins. Yeah, I had mold exposure. And then I had POTS, IBDS.
Yeah. What are mycotoxins, just briefly?
That is the toxin emitted from mold, from fungi. So if you have the black mold in your house, which, believe it or not, is another thing that is way more common than people realize, because the standards for building right now to pass code have lowered and our climate has changed. And so we're finding, again, I mean, I don't want to, you know, corner myself into an exact number, but I feel like almost everybody I talk to, they'll even say to me, oh yeah, I was exposed to mold. And the ones who don't, I start asking them questions, and then they're like, yeah, I think maybe I was. It's there, and it's in houses that look beautiful. It's in brand new homes. You just don't know it's behind the walls. And so again, that's an easy one too, that if we just overlay it, you start seeing results. That's an easy answer.
What do you do for that? So like, I live in Asheville, North Carolina. It's a temperate rainforest. There is mold in literally anything that's not new construction, which is why when I was helping my partner move, that was like the requirement, was she is extremely sensitive. And I am less sensitive, but I've lived in at least 2 houses that I know there was black mold, because same person who had Hashimoto's had some serious black mold or just mold sensitivity. I'm sure, right, like you said, these things usually come all at once if you're if you're fighting them. But is there an easy protocol for helping your body eliminate mycotoxins?
I do have a mold food list overlay. I overlay
Yeah.
over the anti-inflammatory,
Yeah.
just to, like, obviously we're not going to have you eat more fungi if you're already exposed to it, or, so.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
I
So
eat so many shiitakes. Wow. Yeah.
yeah, stop that. And then I do bring, again, you've got to open those pathways. You got to get detoxing. So I start pushing on the detox pathways. I do consider colloidal silver up the nose.
Okay.
That helps because, a lot of times when we do have mycotoxin exposure, the main thing we get it from is inhalation. And this tissue is just great. And colloidal silver is fantastic for so many things. And then binders at night to really kind of help the body evacuate. And then there's lots of other modalities, which I bring in all the time anyway.
Binders like foods that will bind to those particles.
Binders like activated charcoal.
Yeah. Okay. So that,
like
or
that.
maybe people know about cilantro for heavy metals, maybe some things like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can do food, except you need a lot of it.
Right.
So my favorite now, I mean, activated charcoal is cheap and easy. People can go get that. But I really like one of the supplement companies I work with my clients is Cellcore, and they use carbon technology. And so it only binds to toxins. It doesn't bind to nutrients. Doesn't bind
carbon selective.
I love it. Absolutely love it. But you need some kind of binder because also, if you're still symptomatic and you've been removed from that environment, then the next hiccup is you're not detoxing appropriately. Right. That's why two people can live in the same environment and one doesn't get as sick as the other one, and so we've got to do that. And then we use that binder to just kind of help them, our liver flushes toxins at night. So if you take the bind before you go to bed and help bind and kind of help evacuate it out. And then there's lots of other modalities too that I usually push. But that's for anybody. Like castor oil packs are fabulous. And then, they may need to open the lymphatic drainage pathways, right? And get the lymph moving. We can do dry brushing, lymphatic massage, stuff like that. But the big ones are the colloidal silver, the diet overlay, opening those pathways, and then a binder at night.
That's good to know. I'm going to use that as a nice little plug for molecular hydrogen, which is a fancy blue bottle. Do you know about molecular hydrogen?
I've not done a lot of research on it.
Yeah, it's not a binder. It's just one of those weird ones that I stumbled onto like a year and a half ago. And it's the most potent antioxidant we know of. It's H2. It's just two hydrogen atoms in a neutral bond. And it literally just binds to, I don't know about mycotoxins, but reactive oxygen species in general, oxidants, and neutralizes them on the spot with zero collateral damage. Your body makes it, but your microbiome is supposed to make it. And most people's microbiomes are under assault all the time, right? So it's kind of it's just in water, which is why it's easy. You don't have to do anything extra. You just drink water. It's diffused in the water. It's made by a couple of different processes. But the other cool thing, and the reason I thought about it, was the presence of it endogenously, kind of like endogenous ketones, is a signal to your liver and all of your antioxidant pathways. So superoxide dismutase kicks up, the NRF2 kicks up, like all of your existing antioxidant pathways kick up with zero. Usually people know about that maybe from like broccoli sprouts or elderberry or the things, but those also have potential collateral damage. Like elderberry is straight poison if you do it in high doses. So it's a little bit of toxicity.
Yeah, but it's great when you need it.
Correct. It's a great hormetic stressor. So molecular hydrogen is not a hormetic stressor because there's no stress involved. It just signals those pathways. So that was cool. But I don't know if it would bind to anything like mycotoxin wise. So is there anything nutritionally? C60 came to mind when you said carbon, like buckyballs. There's some C60 supplements. Do you think those would be effective at all for the binder, or just does charcoal work well enough?
I think charcoal works well enough, to be honest with you. I mean, it does what I need it to do. Yeah. So, I have brought in like bentonite clay and things like that before.
I thought of zeolite, when you said that too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's enough.
Okay. That's wonderful and cheap. Yeah. Activated charcoal is very cheap.
Yeah. And as long as you're willing to take it away from everything, then it is cheaper than the carbon technology from Cellcore. So, just, I hate to say it because they're going to take over the world, but you can even get it from Amazon by tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, that makes it very nice.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That's a big one because probably most people in wet climates with old construction have some level of systemic mold.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
How does that come out? Like, so wake up with a stuffy nose or a sore throat, or how do people usually figure out that they might have mold exposure?
Brain fog is a huge
Brain
one.
fog. Okay.
Yeah, that's the big one. Brain fog that's not going away is my first indicator to ask. I mean, at this point, I'm asking everybody that I
Right.
see because it's so prevalent, but in that way we can decide what we want to bring in first. Because, if somebody comes in and they have, let's say they have Lyme and they have mast cell and they have mold exposure, you have to address these in a particular order or else they won't get better, right? Like you have to address mold or you're not going to see a difference in mast cell. You have to address Lyme or you won't see a difference in mast cell. However, you can't address Lyme without addressing parasites first. So it's just, playing with that order too. So I tend to ask them all.
You're right. How do you deal with parasites? That is always, actually, I didn't hear about that until like a year ago. And then
We
everyone
all have
started doing
parasites.
parasites, right? And I was like, where did this come from? Is there, so the thing that I find in parasite cleanses, there's like three common ingredients in all of the pills. It's always black walnut hull, um, cloves, and there's another one I'm missing. It's an herb. Okay, I guess I'll just ask you, what do you do for parasite cleanse?
Those are both in it. I've worked with a couple of different companies. My
Yeah.
favorite for parasites is Cellcore.
Yep.
And you do it, you do a full moon challenge. And so you make sure to start the protocol on full moon. And you can pulse it. And if you pulse it, that's even better because very similar to the spirochetes. They kind of sneak back and then you hit them again. But they say we all have some level of parasites. It's just
How do they get in? Because usually, I mean, the health authorities will be like, oh, if you don't live in a tropical climate, don't worry about it. This is non-founded. And I was like, I think everyone has some level of parasites.
everybody does because sometimes we'll get our food is not quite it's not quite cooked enough. Now we're not getting sick, but they're coming in that way, right?
Right.
Or I love sushi, and
Yeah.
that's one of those things that I just every time I eat it now I think about it. I don't eat it anymore because I don't eat rice, but it's just that's another place that I hear you get them big time from.
So just raw food, raw seafood, raw
Undercooked,
animal
yeah,
products. Yeah.
yeah.
So you mean I can't eat my medium rare steaks anymore? No, I'm just kidding. I'll
Oh,
still
and
do
yeah,
that.
well, that's not, I mean, mine is still breathing when I eat my steak, so
Yeah.
I get it. And for the record, you brought up hormesis, and not many people know what that means. So that's a whole podcast for another day if you ever want to
Yes.
talk about hormesis. That's important to me.
Yeah. Well, that is the biohacking world that is
Mhm,
gaining more and more traction. Is basically just all revolving around hormetic stress and hormesis. It's ways
mhm.
to stress your body without keeping it in the stress state. Although I'm pretty sure a lot of those people, I can get real wrapped up in like biohacking morning routines, and I have a feeling there's just a lot more stress involved than people really need in their lives, and that it
If you
doesn't
obsess
actually
about
go
it, for
away.
sure.
Yeah.
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 Fasting is a big one that I really enjoy. It's just using
Yeah.
intermittent fasting for it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of my clients who traveled all over the world. He does venture capital stuff, and he's like, I just saw him actually for a completely different project, and within 2 weeks he was going to be in 8 different countries. And he was like, I need a way that works wherever I am, so it couldn't really be food related. And I was like, you're probably just going to like intermittent fasting. And he did. He would just stop eating at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and go for it until the next morning, and he felt great. It's one
I
of
bet
those.
he felt like $1,000,000, except when he was
Yep.
going to bed hungry. Otherwise, I bet he felt great.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's a bulkier dude, so he had plenty of fat to work off of. But yeah, his brain fog completely disappeared. Like he was like, the mornings were his favorite time. He had plenty of energy, zero brain fog, and he could actually do like early morning exercise routine, and then get all of his calories in within like 6 hours. But for some people, it works really well. For people like me, doesn't work so well because my body like naturally fasts. Like it's actually very difficult for me to put on weight. So when I hit the like 16 hours, I'm like, that's plenty. I don't need to do excessive fasting because I'm already, my
But
metabolism is
that's good
already very
anyway.
active.
I mean,
Right.
you can get into autophagy in as little as 14 hours.
Right.
So
That's what I go for. I just want that little bit of increased autophagy in that window without me feeling any real sluggishness, and then I'll pack some serious calories on. It's also difficult to do like 3,000 plus calories in an eating window that's like 8
I would
hours.
say so. I don't have that
Yeah.
problem. I
Yeah.
don't get to eat 3,000 calories. I would gain a lot of weight, but I
Yeah.
bet that is, yeah.
Yeah. There's an entire Facebook group called Keto Gains, which is basically people just doing that. They're trying to like bulk on ketosis, and it is really difficult sometimes. You're
Yeah.
kind of fighting your metabolism. Yeah. Okay. We went all over the place. So we got
We did.
mycotoxins, we got Hashimoto's, we got Lyme. There are big ones that you specialize in that you see all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. I do the Lyme, the tick-borne. I do mold.
Mhm.
I do histamine, mast cell. I do any autoimmune disease. I mean, obviously I'll work with anybody, but
Yeah.
those are, former detective. It's kind of, I like the puzzle. I like the ones
Yeah.
that are complex cases only because most of the time they're not listened to by somebody else, or they're just told they're drama queens. And again, when you have that many, you really do need to figure out what order you do them. If somebody just comes in and says, oh, I'm going to give you medicine for this, but they
Yeah.
haven't addressed something prior, they may not see results, and then they're going to get frustrated, and they're going to lose faith in what we do for a living. And so we want to move that needle as quick as possible, because if they're miserable, they come to you and they literally are depressed because they're so sick. And if we can just move that needle a little bit, then we're going to automatically start moving that mindset at the same time.
Yeah. And that leads in my sort of my final question is, aside from the anti-inflammatory diet and the nutritional protocol, is there any other big mover that people can do, regardless if they think they have one of those conditions? If anything is showing up, is there something other than like getting good quality sleep that is such a big mover for just helping your inflammation and your immune system in general?
Absolutely. So in my practice, I founded it on something I call the wellness model, which I think it's 4 foundations that I think anybody needs if they want to maintain or regain their health, which is the opposite of what I think is the illness model. I feel like standard medicine uses an illness model that's all based on quick fixes and in pharmaceuticals. And of those foundations is nutrition and digestive health, right? So that's an easy one we can cover. Lifestyle and functional movement. So sleep is in there with the lifestyle, and you think about the detoxing modalities that we were talking about. No toxins in your home, get rid of the plastic, bring in castor packs, that kind of stuff, but also movement. And so that would be the one that I would say people need to move. And when they say, I can't move because I hurt, well, move and maybe you'll stop hurting. It's just, you have to move and find that sweet spot on the bell curve, which will change, right? As you hit that hormetic ceiling and stress yourself in a good way, it will change. But that one I think is important to remember. And then, my third pillar is hormones and metabolism, which again, with the talk, we can talk another day for, but I use, again, that clean keto overlay, intermittent fasting. There is a place for carnivore, especially if you want to reset
complete elimination. Yeah.
And then the last one is mindset and mental wellness. And I think that one is really important. It's easy to become depressed, especially seasonal depression for people who like vitamin D, but illness is lonely. And so if you are somebody who's trying to navigate an illness by yourself, you're going to be lonely, and you're going to have to work on that mindset. The mind is very powerful, and the mind can keep you from getting better. It can override anything you try to implement on your body.
Yeah. People know about the placebo effect. There's also the opposite, which is depressing, which is the nocebo, which is when a doctor tells you have something and you accept that as truth and your body responds accordingly. I mean, usually it's only used in like terms of cancer or extreme conditions, but your mind can manifest will switch off all sorts of genetics or turn on all sorts of genetics based off of your current reality or what you're programming yourself with. So a lot of those sort of quantum mechanic things, like I'm a big fan of Joe Dispenza and just his meditations, because if you can make yourself sick, which plenty of people will acknowledge, you can also make yourself better. Right? If you have control over your genetic expression just with your mind, that's a very powerful thing to understand.
The mind absolutely can work on those genetics for sure. So you got to think about stress level, getting in that parasympathetic state. Self-care is a big one. I'm working on a program right now just on self-care alone.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I have a huge issue with that. I'm the traditional type A, go, go, go. And when I'm like, oh, I'm not stressed, my girlfriend will like look at me cross-eyed and be like, When was the last time you like sat down for 45 minutes? And I'll be like, touche. Okay.
I'm with you there, and my colleagues that you have spoken with before would probably be like rolling their eyes if they heard me talk about
Yeah.
healthcare, because I'm the worst. I'm a big giver, and
Yeah.
I know what to do too. But
Yeah.
I'm a work in progress.
May I add one pillar to your four pillars?
Hmm.
No one says hydration.
Oh, that's part of my nutrition pillar, I
Is it
promise.
okay? I put it separately because water quality is so weird. I do so hydration and mineralization I put as its own thing because it's kind of the same with your how you said about mold. Like everyone probably has some level. Everyone's got some level of dehydration because
Hmm.
most people's water sucks. Not by anything they did, but most bottled water is like mildly absorbable. Tap water is straight poison. So the water people are consuming a lot of it has mold in it and a lot of it has like microcystin and just it's an easy source of toxins. So I think people making like small upgrades in water can be a big mover, and dehydration affects every part of the body.
You're
And I think
absolutely
like
right. You are.
75% of people in the US are very dehydrated.
Mhm.
Arthritis is technically dehydrated joints. It's your body maintains a certain level of water and it'll pull water and minerals from wherever it needs to keep your blood a certain way. So and brain health, right? It's like 80% water, it flushes it every night if you're getting proper sleep, used in everything. So I think especially if people aren't doing a ton of fruit, there's not a lot of water intake. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I can't remember if it's an eighth or a quarter of an inch that your brain shrinks just while you sleep because of lack of water.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a big one. It's kind of the studies that I mean, I got a bunch, but the most sort of alarming one was when I was doing personal training, and one of the facts they will just spit out. I didn't even check if it was true, but I believe it is. If you go into a workout dehydrated, your lift capacity is at minimum starting off 20% less.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's immediate bottleneck. You're immediately capping yourself just with dehydration.
I'll have to, I drink a lot of water, but maybe I
Yeah.
should have it a little bit. I'm a big lifter, so I'll have to figure that out.
Yeah, I look at ionized water in general, or just molecular hydrogen, and that's where all of the literature is on sort of more absorbable forms of water. So water is a battery, right? So you're supposed to be getting charge from it. So look for water that has a negative millivolt charge, which almost no bottled water is. Same thing with food and soil depletion. It's just there's a lot of contaminants now in water, which all changes the
Mhm.
charge of it. So that could be,
Absolutely.
I have a whole podcast for that. It's called Abundance on Tap. Yeah. But I would love to have you back on and chat, go into some of maybe the overlays and we can get into the weeds, although most people probably think this was in the weeds, but I thought it was very surface level. But I love getting into the details of just helping, if someone has one of these manifestations and they don't feel well, the overlays probably won't be that complex. Like first do this, then do this, right? People will spend if something's bad enough, a good amount of lifestyle and habit change just to feel better. Like money usually isn't the only thing that'll make people spend money is if they feel sick all the time. And I
Hmm.
really I don't like that, but it's true for myself as well. Whereas the preventative side is usually so much easier. Obviously, you can't prevent Lyme all that easily, other than like checking yourself all the time after you're in fields. But yeah, it takes so little sometimes to feel better, and it's so much easier than having to dig yourself out of a huge hole.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I really appreciate your time, Jamie. Do you want to leave people with where they can find you, and I'm sure find some of the basic protocols and all that?
Of course. Okay. So my company is called the Functional Wellness Collective. And it's manifested a little bit differently. So I do see people one-on-one. I do, they have to fill out an application, make sure we're a good fit just because I have limited spots for people with these conditions. I do a lot of one-on-one work with them, but I also have online programs. So I do have one called Personalized Paleo. We talked a lot about the word personalized
Nice.
there, that walks them through and they get to self-assess after each elimination and addition, to determine, if they want to move further, because it really is about personalizing for them. And of course, that one goes into all of the hydration, the sleep, the mindset stuff too. And then I have another one called Cleaner Keto, and that one is really great for people who have metabolism issues, hormone imbalance. Just some more tools in their toolbox. But and I am in the work for some other ones. And then I also have a membership. So if somebody was to buy the program, they get 30 days in my membership for free. And then after that, it's like pennies. But we do challenges and monthly challenges. We always get speakers. We do goal setting workshops.
Nice.
I think goal setting is very important. As you're a primal person, you know what a SMART goal is. So we do SMART goals. And so Functional Wellness Collective, I am on Instagram. I am on Facebook, TikTok, all those places that keep us busy. And I did write a book, best-selling book, about my family's journey with Lyme disease, autoimmune disease, all the things we went through. It's got a weird name, but it's called There's a Deer at the Door and a Cow in the Mudroom, Learning to Live While Living with Lyme. Because I don't make this up, we really did have a pet deer who would bang her nose on the front door when she wanted potato chips. And we did have a premature calf born that was so tiny, it was like a dog, and we had to bring it, keep it alive, and we brought it in our mudroom. So that's the book. If you're just, I do think it, I like people to resonate with me and to know if, I'm a good fit personality wise, even when we work with somebody. If you go to my website, I actually offer the book for free if they just pay for shipping. So there's an option beyond Amazon, and it's in all the bookstores. It's also an audio, but if they want it for free, just want to give me shipping, they're welcome to come to my site and get it.
Nice. I will definitely put those all in the show notes, and I might do that. I'm curious. Yeah,
I can send you the links too if you want. And I'd love to come back on and we can talk a little bit deeper about any of the categories you want to go over again.
Yeah, you're a wealth of knowledge, and the level of detail you go into definitely feeds my analytical, my left brain, and I just think it just helps people better understand the loneliness factor is so big with, any of these, but especially the like real crippling, amorphous, almost unnamed until you find someone to have a correct test. And I will also get I'll just put your info and they can go through to get the more accurate testing information, because I'm sure that's a huge source of frustration. And
I do offer testing. I have new testing. And all the supplements and things like that. So I really try to work with people, whether they, if they're adamant they don't want to do Western medicine, then I can work with them. If they want me to do alongside with Western medicine, we can do that too, because supplements aren't going to hurt. Right. But there's some really good ones. I have 2 different companies I work with Lyme specifically that really pack a punch.
Awesome. Okay. We are up on time, so I will let you get back to your clients, and thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in this far, everyone. I hope you really enjoyed the podcast. I learned a ton, and this was really impactful for me simply because I know quite a few people who suffer from Lyme disease, and a number of people that suffer from Hashimotos and general autoimmune conditions and heightened inflammation in general. If you'd like to connect with Jamie, all of her information is below. Make sure to like this video, subscribe. If you'd like to know more about metabolic coaching and finding out your true energy levels, feel free to follow me at cultivated.change on Instagram, or alexandercorey.com has all of my health coaching programs as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next episode.